Peace is not weakness. It is not surrender. It is not silence born of fear. Peace is what happens when a person has seen enough chaos to finally refuse it, when the noise no longer impresses you, when arguments no longer tempt you, when emotional storms no longer pull you into their center. And this is exactly why peace is feared, because it cannot be manipulated, it cannot be provoked, and it cannot be controlled. The moment you chose peace, something ancient and uncomfortable was exposed. The old patterns that thrived on reaction began to starve. The voices that depended on your attention grew restless, not because you were wrong, but because you were no longer available. Peace disrupts systems that rely on imbalance. It removes the stage from those who perform best in disorder. It denies energy to cycles that survive only when emotions are raw and unguarded. When you stop explaining yourself, when you stop defending your calm, when you stop proving your worth, a shift occurs. You are no longer participating, you are observing, and observation is power. That quiet composure you carry now, it is not emptiness, it is mastery. It is the presence of someone who has learned that the greatest strength is not loud resistance, but unwavering stillness. And that stillness terrifies anything that once needed your chaos to survive. The silence that ends old power. There is a moment in every long struggle when noise loses its purpose. Not because the conflict is resolved, but because the soul grows tired of feeding it. Silence in that moment is not retreat. It is evolution. It is the instant you realize that reacting has been costing you more than resisting ever did. For a long time you believed your voice was your shield, your explanations, your defense, your emotional responses, proof that you cared, that you were present, that you were alive in the situation. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, you began to notice something unsettling. Every reaction strengthened the very patterns you were trying to escape. Every explanation prolonged a cycle that never intended to understand you. And so, without ceremony, without announcement, you stepped into silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of clarity. And that silence did not weaken you. It stripped old power of its oxygen. Old power survives on engagement. It does not need truth, fairness, or resolution. It needs motion. It needs motion. It needs emotion. It needs the constant back and forth that keeps everyone locked in familiar roles. As long as you reacted, the structure remained intact. As long as you argued, justified, defended, or even pleaded, the system felt alive. Silence interrupts that rhythm. It breaks the spell. When you stop responding the way you always have, confusion enters the room. The rules are suddenly unclear. The familiar levers no longer work. This is why silence feels threatening to those who relied on your predictability. It removes their sense of control without ever confronting them directly. And the most unsettling part? You did nothing dramatic. You simply withdrew your energy. That quiet withdrawal is not something old power knows how to fight. There is a deep discomfort that arises when someone refuses to play the expected role. Silence denies the satisfaction of reaction. It denies escalation. It denies the emotional exchange that once kept everything spinning. And in that denial, something important is revealed. Much of what appeared strong was actually dependent on your engagement, dependent on your emotional labor, dependent on your willingness to carry weight that was never yours to begin with. When you fall silent, you expose this dependency. The absence of your response becomes louder than any argument you could have made. It forces others to sit with themselves, with their words, with their intentions, without the distraction of your reaction to soften or redirect the moment. Silence does not accuse, but it makes evasion impossible. At first, this silence may feel unnatural to you. After all, you were trained explicitly or subtly to respond, to explain, to smooth things over, to keep the peace by sacrificing your own. Breaking that habit feels like standing still while everything around you urges movement. There may be guilt, there may be doubt, there may be the unsettling question of whether you are doing the right thing. But this discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is evidence of change. You are stepping out of a pattern that once defined you. You are allowing space where there used to be noise. And in that space, something new begins to form. Self-respect. Not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet kind that no longer needs permission to exist. Silence also reveals truth in a way words cannot. When you stop filling the gaps, others rush to fill them for you. Their intentions become clearer. Their expectations surface. Their discomfort speaks volumes. You begin to see who valued your presence and who valued your compliance, who respected your boundaries and who only tolerated them when they were convenient. This clarity is not cruel, but it is uncompromising. It does not soften reality to spare feelings. It simply allows reality to stand on its own. And once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. Silence, in this way, becomes a teacher. It shows you what conversation once concealed. What makes this silence truly powerful is that it does not seek victory. It seeks alignment. You are no longer trying to win an argument or prove a point. You are choosing coherence between your inner world and your outward behavior. Your calm becomes consistent. Your responses become intentional rather than automatic. And that consistency creates a presence that cannot be shaken easily. People feel it, even if they cannot name it. The atmosphere shifts when you enter a room without emotional hooks, without defensiveness, without the need to be understood at all costs. You are no longer broadcasting availability for conflict. You are simply present, and that presence carries weight. In time, you will notice that silence changes you as much as it changes the dynamic around you. Your nervous system begins to settle, your thoughts slow, your reactions soften into responses or disappear altogether. You gain the ability to observe rather than absorb. This is not detachment from life, but discernment within it. You learn where your energy belongs and where it does not. You learn that not every comment deserves an answer, not every provocation requires a reply, and not every misunderstanding needs correction. Silence teaches you restraint, and restraint sharpens your strength. Old power crumbles not because it is attacked, but because it is no longer reinforced. Without your reactions, the structure weakens. Without your emotional investment, the cycle loses momentum. This is the quiet end of something that once felt permanent. There is no explosion, no dramatic conclusion, just a gradual fading. And in its place, something steadier grows. A sense of agency, a sense of groundedness, a sense that you are no longer living in response to others, but in alignment with yourself. Silence, when chosen consciously, becomes the final word. Not because it silences others, but because it no longer needs to speak at all. When you understand this, you stop fearing silence. You stop rushing to fill it. You stop apologizing for it. You recognize it as the space where your power returns to you undisturbed, unnegotiated, and finally, fully your own. Why calm exposes what control was hiding. Calm is often misunderstood because it arrives without spectacle. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It simply settles in, quietly rearranging the balance of power in ways that are easy to miss at first and impossible to ignore later. For a long time, tension was treated as normal. Raised voices, emotional urgency, constant clarification, and unspoken pressure were accepted as the cost of connection. You were conditioned to believe that intensity meant importance, that emotional friction was a sign of care, and that staying alert at all times was the responsible way to exist. But calm interrupts that belief. When you become calm not temporarily, not performatively, but consistently, you introduce something foreign into an environment that relied on instability to function, and that calm does not blend in, it exposes. Control rarely appears as control, it often hides behind concern, tradition, responsibility, or emotional closeness. It disguises itself as guidance or protection, shaping behavior subtly rather than forcefully. When you were reactive, when you rushed to explain yourself or adjusted your emotions to keep the atmosphere stable, that hidden control went unnoticed. It felt like normal interaction. But calm removes the camouflage. When you stop matching the emotional temperature of the room, the contrast becomes visible. The pressure that once felt mutual now feels one-sided. The expectations that once seemed reasonable now feel intrusive. Calm does not accuse anyone of wrongdoing, but it highlights imbalance with brutal clarity. What makes calm so unsettling is that it cannot be redirected easily. Anger can be provoked. Fear can be amplified. Guilt can be leveraged. But calm resists manipulation because it is not rooted in urgency. It does not rush to fix, to soothe, or to justify. When you respond with measured words or choose not to respond at all, the usual strategies lose their effectiveness. Questions meant to provoke emotion fall flat. Statements designed to trigger defensiveness meet quiet acknowledgement or silence. In that stillness, the underlying intent becomes obvious. Control depends on emotional hooks, and calm removes them one by one. There is a moment, often subtle, when others realize that their influence has weakened. It may appear as confusion, irritation, or increased intensity, not because you have done anything wrong, but because the old methods are no longer working. Calm forces a reckoning. It asks an unspoken question. If you are no longer reacting, what is left? Without emotional compliance, authority must stand on respect alone. Without urgency, demands must justify themselves, and many cannot. This is why calm feels threatening to systems built on pressure rather than mutual understanding. It shifts the burden of explanation away from you and back onto the structure itself. For you, this transition into calm may have felt risky at first. You may have worried that disengaging emotionally would be seen as indifference, disrespect, or distance. You may have feared being misunderstood or judged. But what you discovered instead was freedom. Calm allowed you to choose when to engage and when to step back. It gave you the ability to listen without absorbing, to speak without escalating, and to exist without constant emotional labor. You were no longer managing everyone else's comfort at the expense of your own. And in that shift, you reclaimed something essential, your autonomy. Calm also sharpens perception. When emotions are no longer clouding your awareness, patterns become easier to see. You begin to notice how often conversations circle back to the same unresolved points. You recognize how certain reactions were expected of you, almost rehearsed. You see how boundaries were respected only when they were weak, and challenged the moment they became firm. This clarity is not cynical, it is grounded. It allows you to respond from understanding rather than habit. And once you see these patterns, calm gives you the strength to step out of them without drama. Perhaps the most profound effect of calm is how it changes your internal landscape. The constant alertness fades, your body relaxes. Your thoughts become less reactive, more intentional. You stop replaying conversations in your mind, imagining better responses or bracing for future conflict. Calm creates mental space. In that space, you reconnect with your values, your priorities, and your sense of self. You are no longer defined by how well you handle pressure or how much you can endure. You begin to define yourself by how aligned you feel within, and that alignment becomes your new standard. This inner calm radiates outward. Even when you say very little, people sense it. They may not comment on it, but they respond to it. Some adjust their behavior, meeting you with greater respect and consideration. Others struggle, pushing harder in an attempt to regain familiar control. Neither reaction requires your correction. Calm is not about managing outcomes, it is about maintaining integrity. You remain steady regardless of the response, and that steadiness sends a clear message: you are no longer negotiable in the ways you once were. Over time, calm reshapes relationships. Those built on mutual respect deepen. Those built on control weaken. This is not an act of separation, but of differentiation. You are no longer entangled in roles that required you to be smaller, louder, or more reactive than you truly are. You stand in your own emotional authority, unhurried and unprovoked. Calm becomes your baseline, not a temporary strategy, but a way of being. And in that state, control loses its hiding place. What remains is either genuine connection or the quiet acceptance that some dynamics cannot survive without imbalance. In choosing calm, you did not withdraw from life. You engaged with it more honestly. You stopped performing emotional labor for systems that thrived on your unrest. You allowed truth to surface without forcing it, and in doing so, you discovered that calm is not the absence of strength, but its most refined form. It is the presence that sees clearly, moves deliberately, and refuses to be governed by anything other than its own grounded awareness. The moment you chose peace, the game changed. There is a precise moment often unnoticed by others, sometimes barely acknowledged by you, when everything begins to shift. It is not marked by confrontation or closure. No announcement is made, no doors are slammed. Instead, it arrives quietly, as a decision made deep within, where exhaustion finally gives way to clarity. You realize that continuing the same emotional exchanges will never produce a different outcome. You see, perhaps for the first time, that the struggle was never about resolution, but about repetition. And in that moment, you choose peace, not as a temporary escape, not as avoidance, but as a new position from which you will no longer move. That single decision alters the entire structure of the dynamic, even if nothing outwardly appears to change at first. Before this choice, the game was predictable. Roles were defined. Reactions were expected. Emotional responses were almost scripted. You played your part because it felt necessary, because you believed that engagement meant responsibility and silence meant failure. But peace does something radical. It removes you from the board without flipping it over. You stop reacting on cue. You stop explaining yourself in circles. You stop measuring your worth by how well you can absorb pressure. This withdrawal is not dramatic, and that is precisely why it is effective. The game depended on your participation, and when you step back, it continues briefly on momentum alone before faltering in confusion. What changes immediately is not behavior around you, but awareness within you. You begin to notice how much of your energy was spent anticipating responses, rehearsing conversations, and managing emotional fallout. Peace interrupts that mental noise. It creates a pause where there used to be urgency. In that pause, you see the dynamic for what it truly is, a loop designed to keep you emotionally engaged without ever offering resolution. Choosing peace breaks that loop internally first. You no longer feel compelled to fix, to clarify, or to convince. You begin to trust your perception rather than seeking validation for it. This internal shift is subtle, but it is irreversible. As peace settles in, others sense the change before they understand it. Conversations feel different. The usual triggers no longer land the way they used to. There is less emotional charge, less immediacy, less access. Some may interpret this as distance or indifference, but what they are truly encountering is autonomy. You are no longer emotionally available on demand. You are present, but not permeable, engaged, but not entangled. This new posture disrupts expectations. The strategies that once worked now feel ineffective, and without confrontation to push against, frustration has nowhere to go. Peace has quietly shifted the balance. Choosing peace also redefines your relationship with conflict. You no longer see it as something that must be addressed immediately or exhaustively. You understand that not every issue is urgent, and not every misunderstanding requires correction. Some things reveal their true nature when left alone. Peace gives you the patience to allow that revelation. Instead of rushing toward resolution, you step back and observe. Patterns emerge, intentions become clearer, and in that clarity you gain the freedom to decide what truly deserves your energy. This discernment is one of peace's greatest gifts. Internally, peace begins to heal what constant vigilance eroded. Your nervous system slows. Your thoughts become less reactive, more deliberate. You stop carrying conversations long after they end. You sleep differently. You breathe differently. The sense of being perpetually on guard gradually fades. This is not because the world has become safer, but because you have stopped placing yourself in the line of unnecessary emotional fire. Peace teaches you that protection does not always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from disengagement. And that disengagement is not a loss, it is a recovery. The most profound change, however, is how you begin to see yourself. Without the constant need to defend your boundaries or justify your choices, your sense of identity strengthens. You no longer define yourself by how much you can endure or how well you can navigate tension. You begin to value steadiness over intensity, alignment over approval. This shift is deeply grounding. It anchors you in your own experience rather than in the reactions of others. And from that anchor, your decisions become clearer, your voice steadier, and your presence more assured. As time passes, the effects of choosing peace ripple outward. Some relationships adjust and stabilize, meeting you in this new space of mutual respect. Others drift or dissolve, unable to function without the friction that once fueled them. This is not a failure of peace, but a revelation of truth. Peace does not destroy connections, it reveals which ones were dependent on imbalance. In allowing those to fall away, you make room for relationships that do not require you to be anything other than yourself. This process may feel lonely at times, but it is also deeply liberating. The game changed the moment you chose peace because the rules were never yours to begin with. They were designed around reaction, not resolution, around control, not connection. By stepping out, you refused to play by those terms. You did not demand a new game, you simply stopped participating in the old one. And in doing so, you discovered that peace is not passive, it is decisive. It is the quiet assertion that your energy is finite and your inner world is not open for negotiation. In the end, choosing peace is not about withdrawal from life, but about entering it more fully. It allows you to show up where it matters, grounded and intentional, rather than scattered and reactive. It frees you from cycles that mistook endurance for strength, and it marks the beginning of a new way of being, one where your calm is not a response to chaos, but a standard you carry with you, regardless of what unfolds around you. Peace as the boundary. They cannot cross for a long time. Boundaries were explained as something you had to defend, reinforce, and constantly justify. They were treated like fragile lines drawn in sand, easily challenged by emotion, obligation, or pressure. You learned to announce them clearly, to repeat them patiently, and to brace yourself for resistance when they were questioned. But peace changes the nature of boundaries entirely. It turns them from statements into states of being. When you are grounded in peace, your boundary is no longer something you argue for. It is something others feel. And what is felt, rather than debated, becomes far more difficult to cross. Peace removes the drama that once invited intrusion. When your emotions were easily stirred, others could step closer under the guise of concern, urgency, or necessity. Emotional intensity created openings, moments where lines blurred and access expanded. But calm closes those openings quietly. There is no emotional gap to exploit, no escalation to ride, no reaction to chase. Peace does not push people away, it simply stops pulling them in. And without that pull, many realize they no longer know how to approach you in the ways they once did. What makes peace such a formidable boundary is that it does not rely on enforcement. Anger demands compliance. Fear seeks reassurance. Guilt negotiates. Peace does none of these. It stands without explanation. When you are at peace, you are not asking others to respect your limits. You are living as though they already exist. Conversations change tone. Requests feel different. Expectations adjust or dissolve. This is not because you have become distant, but because you have become solid. Peace gives your presence weight, and weight commands space naturally. There is often a moment when others test this new boundary, not out of malice, but out of habit. They approach with familiar pressure, familiar emotional cues, expecting the usual response. But peace meets them with steadiness. No defensiveness, no over-clarification, no rush to accommodate. Just presence, unhurried and composed. This moment is revealing. It shows who respects you without needing access to your emotional center, and who only felt comfortable when that center was unguarded. Peace does not argue with either response. It simply remains. For you, this shift may have required letting go of the belief that boundaries must be explained to be valid. You may have been taught that clarity requires justification, that saying no requires a reason, and that calm refusal is somehow incomplete without emotional context. Peace dismantles this belief gently but firmly. It shows you that your inner state is reason enough, that your capacity matters, that choosing not to engage is not an act of disrespect, but of discernment. And once you internalize this, your boundaries stop feeling like walls and start feeling like ground. Peace also changes how you respond to pressure. Where you once felt compelled to answer immediately, to resolve discomfort quickly, or to restore harmony at your own expense, you now allow space. You pause, you assess, you decide. This pause is powerful. It prevents impulsive agreement and emotional overextension. It communicates that access to you is not automatic, that time, attention, and energy are offered intentionally. This does not make you rigid, it makes you reliable to yourself. And that reliability strengthens every boundary you hold. Over time, peace teaches others how to treat you without a single confrontation. Patterns adjust. Some people learn to approach you with greater respect and clarity, sensing that manipulation or pressure will find no traction. Others pull back, unsettled by the absence of emotional leverage. Neither outcome requires your management. Peace does not chase understanding or approval. It allows reality to reorganize around your steadiness. And in that reorganization, your boundaries become part of the environment rather than obstacles to be overcome. Internally, peace as a boundary offers profound relief. You no longer scan conversations for hidden expectations. You no longer prepare defenses before entering a room. You no longer feel responsible for regulating everyone else's emotions. This internal spaciousness is not detachment, it is freedom. It allows you to be present without being consumed, engaged without being absorbed, available without being exposed. Peace protects your inner life not by hardening it, but by grounding it so deeply that intrusion becomes impossible. Perhaps the most important realization is that peace does not isolate you. It filters. It invites connection that is mutual rather than demanding. It allows closeness that does not require self-betrayal. When your boundary is peace, those who wish to connect must meet you there. Calm, respectful, and present. Anything built on pressure, urgency, or emotional control simply cannot pass through. This is not exclusion, it is alignment, and alignment creates relationships that are sustainable rather than draining. In the end, peace becomes the boundary they cannot cross because it does not challenge them. It does not provoke reaction, it renders reaction unnecessary. You are no longer guarding a line, you are inhabiting a state. And from that state, your life arranges itself with greater clarity and ease. You stop explaining why you need space. You stop apologizing for your calm. You stand where you are, steady and whole, knowing that what belongs with you will remain, and what does not will quietly fall away. How inner stillness becomes final authority. Inner stillness is often mistaken for absence of passion, absence of engagement, absence of strength. But in truth, it is the presence of something far more enduring. Stillness is what remains when you are no longer pulled apart by the need to react, explain, or defend. It is the state you enter when your sense of self is no longer negotiated in every interaction. For a long time, authority around you may have been defined by volume, urgency, or emotional intensity. Whoever reacted fastest, spoke loudest, or created the most pressure seemed to lead the moment. But stillness quietly rewrites that definition. It establishes authority not through force, but through alignment. And alignment does not compete, it stands. When you cultivate inner stillness, you stop chasing outcomes. You no longer feel compelled to control how others perceive you or how situations unfold. This does not mean you stop caring, it means you stop contorting yourself to manage responses that were never fully within your control. Stillness teaches you patience, not the passive kind, but the deliberate kind that allows events to reveal themselves fully before you respond. In that patience, you gain clarity. You see where effort is required and where it is wasted. You recognize when to speak and when silence carries more truth. This discernment becomes the foundation of your authority. Authority rooted in stillness is unsettling to those accustomed to emotional leverage. They expect urgency, resistance, or reassurance. Instead, they encounter calm consideration. Requests are met with thoughtful pauses rather than immediate compliance. Challenges are met with measured responses rather than escalation. This shift changes the emotional temperature of every interaction. Without reacting, you redirect the flow of energy. You signal that your decisions come from reflection, not pressure. And in doing so, you reclaim ownership of your time, your attention, and your inner world. Stillness also changes how you listen. You are no longer listening to prepare a defense or craft a response. You are listening to understand, to observe, to assess. This quality of attention is rare, and it carries weight. People feel seen without feeling in control. They sense that you are present, but not impressionable. This balance creates a form of authority that does not dominate but steadies. It invites honesty without surrendering discernment. And because your stillness is not performative, it cannot be easily challenged. Internally, stillness becomes a refuge. The constant mental chatter softens. The urge to replay conversations diminishes. You stop rehearsing explanations for choices you have already made. This quiet does not empty you, it restores you. It allows your nervous system to reset, your thoughts to organize, and your emotions to settle into proportion. From this internal order emerges confidence, not the loud kind that demands recognition, but the grounded kind that does not require it. This confidence is self-sustaining. It does not rise and fall with external validation. As stillness deepens, your decision-making becomes more deliberate. You are no longer rushed by discomfort or swayed by emotional intensity. You can tolerate uncertainty without filling it prematurely. This tolerance is powerful. It allows you to wait for clarity rather than forcing resolution. In many situations, this alone changes the outcome. When you do not rush, others reveal more than they intend. Motivations surface, priorities become clear, and your choices, informed by observation rather than reaction, carry greater precision and impact. Over time, others adjust to this new authority. Some begin to approach you with greater respect, recognizing that persuasion requires substance rather than pressure. Others withdraw, sensing that their usual strategies no longer apply. This is not a rejection, it is a recalibration. Stillness sets a standard. It communicates that engagement with you must be intentional, honest, and grounded. Anything driven by urgency or emotional manipulation finds no entry point. Your authority is not enforced, it is assumed. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of inner stillness is how it aligns you with yourself. You stop betraying your values for temporary